Welcome, everybody. And how are we all doing today? I assume everybody's wearing their name tag, everybody is signed in, and most importantly, everybody has turned off their cell phone. All right. Wisdom Wednesday right here on this stage tomorrow. It'll be about MRI Research Center with Tom Denny. Of course, we have the holiday social Thursday, December 7th from 11:30 to 1:30. You can sign up by December 1st, please, and it is $18 per person. So let's make sure that we do that. I'm sure we'll all have a lot of fun. And with that said, it's that time. Well, you know, we've all heard the phrase, and we try to get it correct, neither rain nor sleet nor dark of night can keep these couriers from their appointed rounds. Well, you know, interestingly enough, the United States Postal Service actually kind of ripped that off. The Persians actually had come up with that phrase over 2,500 years ago to talk about their courier service. And their courier service was quite incredible. It was very similar to what we would know as the Pony Express. The Pony Express, or their courier service, could get a message from one side of the empire to the other side in only 7 days. That's from India all the way to the Mediterranean. Now, interestingly enough, this week I sent my sister a birthday card, and it took 4 days to get from Auburn to Chicago. So you can see that not only did they copy the slogan, but they've also copied their delivery schedule. So, now, to give his own special delivery of Persian history, our personal historic messenger, and I guarantee you he never goes postal, Dr. Joseph Kicklighter!
You never know. You just never know where he'll go. Okay, thank you, Frank. Yes, this is all about those Persians today and a very, very important aspect of Greek history. And you'll notice, of course, that we do call it the Persian Wars. Not the Greek Wars, but the Persian Wars. I wonder who decided that, right? We understand, in fact, that our account, despite all the greatness of the Persians, is a total Greek account. So we understand that, we accept that, and we go from there, and I'll try to fill in as best I can from the Persian point of view how things would have been, because let's face it, they have gotten a fairly negative approach, as we will see, from the man who, of course, as all the textbooks say, was the father of history. Herodotus. Many people insist that when one studies to be a historian, one has to read some Herodotus. How much, I guess, depends on the instructor and the faith and goodness of the student. But in fact, it is rather interesting reading, because Herodotus loves hairy dog stories, and if you want to hear about anecdotes such as the Persian delivery system and all the rest, you learn about it from Herodotus. And he doesn't have a lot of competition either, because as far as the Persian Wars, you go to Herodotus. There are not a variety of other competing historians. He tells it from the Greek point of view, but as we will see, he does say, on occasion, some rather nice things about Persians, or at least he will show us the internal workings of their system. We know ourselves, however, that there are other sources, including, as we just mentioned, Donna, the Bible, right? Talking about Bible study. So why don't we think about that as we go to Cyrus? Truly one of the most remarkable individuals in world history. I mean, if you had to name some of the biggies from all of history, he would probably make anyone's list, regardless of whether you're pro-Greek or pro-Persian or any of the rest. One would have to say, given his military abilities and all of his accomplishments, militarily and otherwise, he would have to make the list. You'll notice his dates in the 6th century. So, when we get on past him into the Persian Wars, we understand that the Greeks are just emerging as independent city-states, and as we saw in previous talks, the Athenians are developing a self-consciousness about who they are, so forth and so on. All of this is part and parcel of the story. The fact that this is going on, and you think, well, I wonder how interested Athenians and Spartans are in what's going on with the Persians. I would say limitedly, because they're not Greeks, are they? They are barbarians, and we've got lots of interesting things right here. They're not even interested in the next polis over, a few miles down the road. So it's we who are great. Self-centered? Yes, quite a bit. So I may be raving and ranting about the greatness of Cyrus, but I'm not sure the Greeks were ready to give him all that much credit. Now, we know the Medes and the Persians, as Scripture would have it, are related while at the same time being separate and apart. You may be aware that prior to Cyrus, the Medes were in a position of superiority, and the Persians were a tribe under their authority, and we are told by the sources that during Cyrus' time, he more or less got his people, the Persians, in control. They were a warlike people, they were an Aryan people, because remember, we never forget, these are the ancestors of the Iranians. So they are part of the Indo-European tradition, and the Medes and the Persians, a phrase right out of the Bible, or a term used by Herodotus and the Medizers, meaning people who collaborate with Persians and Medes, which is not a good thing to be called. Those terms all refer to this Persian-Mede connection. And while they are different, they're alike. You know how folks are. Oh, I can tell you're a Mede. Yeah, well, you Persians think you're so, that kind of thing. Even though they are, of course, within the same family. In any event, we meet Cyrus in the Hebrew Scripture. And that, of course, gives him his Judeo-Christian claim to fame. That we find him in what the scholars tell us. I don't know if this is the way you study it in your classes, but the second Isaiah. The second part of Isaiah seems to have been written by a very different hand from the first chapters of Isaiah. Look at it and see what I mean. This part of Isaiah, the second part, is said to have been written by someone after the Hebrew exile from Palestine. If you recall from the Bible, the Hebrews had been taken over by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. The so-called Babylonian captivity occurred, and many Hebrews during that period were held more or less against their will in Babylon. The literature of that period then, and the writer of 2nd Isaiah is talking about this period is going to be the period of redemption. God has forgiven his people for their sins, and therefore we have come back home, and now it's up to us to make a go at it. All of this is to say that Cyrus is their big hero. Why? Not because he was a convert to the Hebrew cause. In fact, he probably knew nothing about it, could care less. But he was the conqueror of the Babylonian Empire. And he said to Hebrews, as well as to other people, I'm in control now. No more Babylonians. If you want it in a more modern sound, how about the Iranians come into Iraq? That's the way it would be in modern talk. And we say, now you can go home. And so what do we call Cyrus? Believe it or not, the Messiah. Yeah, check it in your Bible. Isaiah 26, isn't that interesting? That's the second Isaiah so-called. Because he writes of the loving and forgiving God, and of course the writer points out that Cyrus did not know me, meaning God, but I'm telling you, meaning Hebrews, that he was the instrument of God for liberating God's people, which is an interesting point of view. Again, I think it's all about us. Believe me, it's not just the Greeks who have big egos too. Remember, the Hebrews are like they're God's folks. And all these other people, Babylonians, Assyrians, big deal. But look at us, You know, this little teeny-weeny people, and we are what really matters. All these others just kind of come and go. But we are God's people. And then very interesting when we do think about Cyrus and understand what a critically important role he plays in the history of the Hebrews and in the formation of their nation after the exile period. And he will become, in a certain sense, a redeeming figure for them, a redeemer. Redeeming people by sending them back to their home, Palestine. Now again, the historical idea is, of course, he'll send them home like he did other folks who may have been in Babylon against their will. Because obviously Cyrus had no interest one way or the other. I mean, y'all can go on home. I mean, and thank me later, you know, and I know you appreciate it. But the idea is all this is a day-to-day work project for a great world conqueror. I mean, I'm doing these things. And I like your religion. It's nice. You have a God. We have a God. By the way, if you're wondering about his God, it's fairly traditional as far as Medes and Persians are concerned, but we're getting ready for a big religious change. And one of my favorite religions is coming soon, and that, of course, is Zoroastrianism. Yeah. So I want that to be emphasized because when we think about Zoroastrianism, years ago people used to say, you know why you're not a Zoroastrian? Because the Greeks beat the Persians. And they say, oh, is that right? Yeah. They would have been ready to envelop us in Zoroastrianism. But the Greeks saved us. Interesting theory, perhaps not exactly true, although it is significant that the Greeks stymied, presumably, the progress of the Persians westward. I guess at this point we can look at the map and yes, Frank, look at those highways. Yeah? So your tax dollars at work, right? Building all those roads. Romans, eat your heart out. The Persians were here first. And, I mean, it really is very impressive if you consider how far they went into modern-day Afghanistan. And they did unite all this area with the famous satraps as the provincial governors, and more or less otherwise allowing the people to pursue whatever religion. They said that when Cyrus went to Babylon, he could love some Marduk, you know, the Babylonian god, and say, oh, I think he's great. But I mean, it's like, wherever he was, I want to be one of you, you know, like a politician. And that's the idea, that Cyrus was very effective in bringing all those people together. Now, the satrap, I assume, had certain responsibility like local assessment, tax assessment, and working with local officials to make them feel like Cyrus loves all my people, and we're not Persians, but we're glad to be part of such a great empire, you know, that kind of thing. So, well, you never get the sense that the Persians are so dominating that everyone hates them. I mean, you always hate somebody else ruling you. We get that. But when you consider some of the other people that might be ruling you, we could be worse. So, you know, you're doing a popularity contest among imperial powers, I think the Persians would do pretty well. In any event, you see the significance here. You see the Mede part, you see the Persian part, and going east, as far as I've already said, to parts of Afghanistan, and to the west, as we will soon see, only a bit into northern Africa, later on with Egypt, and finally in what we would call today Turkey and those areas. Now, this, of course, is not a process of conquest that will end with Cyrus. In fact, it will only begin there. However, we do, and I love this story, that Cyrus's empire did bring into it a kingdom, again in modern-day Western Turkey, that was called Lydia. I think that's such a beautiful name, Lydia. And they were not Greeks, but they weren't Persians. They were Lydians. And they were under a king who was named Croesus. And you may have heard the story of, as you can see from the illustration, that he had a lot of wealth. And he didn't mind showing it to you. So we had a visit from the man that we all know, Mr. Athens, Solon. And it looks like he's pulled out everything, like the family silver and everything, doesn't it? And why do you think he does that? I mean, did Solon ask to see it? No. But he wants to show Solon, you know, you're from Athens, and I'm sure that's real good. Yeah, that's nice. But look at me. Look, I'm so rich. I'm so powerful. I'm Mr. Lydia. Everybody loves me. And I love them. What happiness, what joy. Wouldn't you agree? And of course, Solon's response, count no one happy until the day of death. Yeah, you say, party pooper. So, yeah. And of course, that rascal Solon was right, because Croesus is going down from a world conqueror near you. That means Cyrus of Persia. Because that kingdom, the kingdom of Lydia, let's go back to the map. You see it way over there in the extreme west. And everything is just hunky-dory, and we've got gold, we've got silver, we have everything you could possibly want in this veil of happiness. And then the Persians come. And for a while, it's kind of rough on Croesus. I think maybe Cyrus and the Persians give him a good talking to, and he says, you know, I want so much to be a collaborator. May I work with you? May I be your friend? And I think he does get away with that. But anyway, I'm not sure that they asked Solon to come back for a return visit to Lydia, because he was so ready to give his opinion about the reality of our temporary happiness and pleasure. And that, of course, is a very famous anecdote thanks to Plutarch. You know, it would have to be either Plutarch or Herodotus. But in this case, the tale of Solon in the period after he was the leader of Athens and its changes. Now again, what this means is that there is no longer a kingdom of Lydia. Lydia has now become a part of the Persian Empire. So we have a satrap coming in. Satrap, basically, welcome to Lydia. We are so glad we can be part of the greater world, and we love and all that. And you say, you mean these people are collaborators? Yes, I do. They're going to be part, and we hear little of an independent Lydia anymore. Poor Croesus, still, I guess, missing his happiness, is now going to work with the Persian regime. As a matter of fact, during this period, you really don't get as much sense as you will that there may have been lots of internal unhappiness among Persian subjects. For example, however, after Cyrus' time, his son will have to deal with a full-scale revolt of the Egyptians. And you think, now what have they got to be mad about? I think they are not number one anymore, and it hurts. I mean, when you think about the pharaohs, and you think about their ancient, and these Johnny-come-latelys, these Persian folks, nouveaux, they come in and they say, oh, we have such great roads. Our engineering is superb in Persia. And the Egyptians say, well, look at us. They say, we are, but now we're in charge. And you're wonderful historically speaking. But, I mean, there's a lot of resentment, no doubt. And Cambyses, Cyrus' successor, will have to spend most of his reign dealing with Egyptians. Cambyses is a strange figure without a lot of detail, but it does seem that he was not the ruler his father was, and a cousin engineered a coup d'etat, which made him the ruler, and he is going to be very important to us. Cambyses actually is significant only because of putting down the Egyptian revolt, and this cousin says, oh, he passed away. We're going to miss him. And I know that if he were here today, he would be saying, Darius the Great, please continue my work of making the world a bigger and better place because of Persia. Yeah, that kind of thing. So yes, we do know that in fact he took over, and some people may have gotten hurt in the process. You know, I can't say it was altogether a happy time, but he got power. He became the king. And as such, the all-powerful one would now proceed to become a major figure for Herodotus, back to the Greeks, we never leave the Greeks, back to moving on, where do we go from Lydia? Do we really want to go west if we are the Persians? Or don't we already have enough? I mean, we got Lydia, it's wonderful, we've gotten Egypt back under control, let's just settle back and enjoy all this. No, it does not appear so. Although the extent to which they really wanted to go extreme west, I'm not so sure of. I mean, they were aware, for example, of Carthage, the Phoenician city in North Africa. They were aware of that. So, in other words, they knew there was something there, but whether or not they wanted to get involved in more competition, I'm not so sure. Whatever the case, the Ionian states, and if you don't remember that term, we'll look at the Ionian states shortly. They are the Greek states around the Ionian Sea. And these are the furthest east of those Greek states, and you know there's so many of them, and each of the states is independent, and some are large and some are small, etc., etc. Lots of different varieties of government, this, that, and the other. Well, some of these must have been taken over by the Greeks, presumably under Darius. And apparently, the usual process, you put in the satrap, and we call a member of the Chamber of Commerce, we all meet together and say, now we know there's some issues, but we can all work it out. Let's all, you're going to be part of a greater... So I'm thinking a lot of them said, oh, okay, a bit sullen maybe at first, but accepting the inevitable of Persian rule. However, it appears that at some point, some of these Ionian states may have decided they didn't want some big old barbarian telling them what to do. At first it seemed like maybe it would work, but, these Persians, they could really get on your nerves. And so there may well have been a problem of that sort because there was no indication that that was a matter of incompetent government. Nor, and let me straighten this out from the outset, it is not a matter of they were all little d Democrats fighting against tyranny. Oh, that always cracks me up. Because that always sounds so nice, doesn't it? Yeah, you Persian tyrants, we won't take this anymore. That kind of thing. No. Again, it may have had something to do with the power situation, but it did annoy Darius. And I can promise you, none of these rulers, no matter the egos these Greeks have, I don't believe that these Persians were thinking about Greeks every moment. You know, we do have a big empire to run here. So, you know, this might be our Persian period, and my advisors will talk about some of the issues in the West, and I'll deal with that, and then we'll have lunch and go and move on to another part of the empire. I mean, we got a big empire here. So the idea that the Greeks have are like, God, we're just so obsessed with the Greeks. We've got to have it. You know, Grecophobia. I don't know. I really have a problem. In any event, the states, at least some of them, that are called Ionian states revolted, and two states that I'll show you momentarily, one of which you know well, Athens, and the other, perhaps not so, Eritrea, will send a limited amount of help, but it is not very large. And it is withdrawn before any significant losses occur. So it's like, yeah, let's hear it for the Greeks, and then they kind of wear out. So we mustn't, these aren't the Persian wars we're talking about here. This is merely how it gets started. And according to Herodotus, he's going to put these people down. They're going down, of course. But the Athenians and the others being involved annoys Darius, because otherwise he wouldn't have paid any attention to them. So that is the idea here. This campaign made Darius irritated. And when you're irritated, you want to do something back. And that's apparently what happened. The Ionians were put down, as I've said, and it will bring about plans for another campaign. Why is Darius going to do it? Was it just a little temper spat? Maybe, because we have no evidence that he had any plans for Persia to expand massively westward. Could you think about that? You know, later on we'll talk about Romans and wonder, or Alexander the Great before that, and wonder, don't people have some reasonable idea of limitation? Of how much, how much can you hold? But I mean hold now, I didn't say conquer. Hold, because that is a major factor here, holding. And then again, whether he really wanted it, we'll never know. I mean, let's face it, the Persians had much of the civilized world, not all of it, but it had much of the civilized world because it had the whole Middle East. And by moving eastward, other than the Carthaginians, it's not too civilized out there, except for these Greeks. So what do we want to do about them? Okay, now here's a map, just in case. Look at all those red dots, and again, makes you aware of these various Greek cities. But again, understanding that this is not by any means all of them. These are just some of the biggies. Tyrannies, as well as oligarchs. Your book uses the verb democratized, and I'm not sure, speaks of switching from tyranny to democracy, and I'm not so sure about. They may be a little oversimplifying. That's okay. Just so you understand again, though, that the Persians are right there on you. And I don't guess the Greeks had ever had an enemy or anyone that close to them. In other words, what we call Turkey today, because there were no Turks, right? It was all Greek. The kingdom of Lydia, was now part of the Persian Empire. And now the Persians have taken those Ionian states. I mean, they are really moving forward. If you are Greek, you may feel they're kind of breathing down your necks. These Persians. Is that bad? Well, not for some. Because I'll tell you a little secret. When you say Greeks versus Persians, don't you believe it. Because Greeks are like all the rest of us. They come in a lot of different packages. In other words, some Greeks, and I hate to say it, may have been collaborators. Yes. It's a shocking thing. Because I know we all like to believe they're all that good. Let us fight together for civilization against the nasty Persians. Some of them were actually, hey, you want to give me a bribe? I could be useful. Yeah, there were some of those. It's not a pretty story sometimes. And Herodotus makes us aware of much of this. As I say, there are lots of stories of evil versus virtue. But it's definitely not a question of all Greeks being together. If it took them till the 19th century after Christ to become a nation, then I hardly think they're all going to give me a big Greek hug, you know, back in this day and age, right? I mean, they definitely have their own individual interests and concerns. The Battle of Marathon, for which the word marathon has come down to us, comes about as the major facet of Darius' decision to come down on the Greeks. He's sending forces at the location of Marathon, north of Athens. And, according to a somewhat biased source, will lead to quite a few Persian casualties, but hey, we did well, the home team. And as you see, Greek losses were very small. Now, the strategy was that the lightly armed Persian infantry were lulled into the midst of the Greek, and remember, hoplites. And then they got on either side of the Persian forces and started wiping them out, according to Herodotus. In other words, it was very skillful military prowess that brought about this great victory. And it was a victory that came about despite the fact the Spartans would love to have been there but couldn't make it. I've always had a real hard time with that. Suppose I gave a battle and somebody couldn't come. You know, I mean, it's like, do you go on and have it anyway? Or it's like, no, well, let's just wait there. And they said they were busy. They were having religious ceremonies. And I've always, really? I mean, that's real nice to be religious. I'm glad folks have their faith. You know, that's real nice. But anyway, they had the ceremonies and said, could y'all wait and we'll try to get there when we can? Yeah, right, that's going to happen. So, truly, and they were kind of disappointed when they did get there. And they said, oh, shoot, it's already over. Because, you know, it's like the Athenians are going to get all the credit. So I think, you know, that's a downer in a way. But, hey, all we do for the gods, you know, want to keep them happy. So we have those ceremonies. But, yeah, they missed that one. And so this is the start of these encounters between Greeks and Persians, this famous Battle of Marathon. If you have been there, or you're thinking of going to Greece and you're thinking of sites, this might be one you will want to go to. Although the one that for whom the battle, or rather the events pertain to the marathon, that too is an interesting site in where the Olympics began. This particular illustration, Phidippides was the famous messenger who ran from the battle. Yeah, and he passed away. Yeah, it was quite a rugged journey, but to tell the people he had won and understand that his encounters were part of the planning of the Olympics at the end of the 19th century, you know, when they began them again. And that the story of Phidippides and his famous run would become very important in the Olympic mythology. In any event, they did win, and the various forces, and I do say various because they had a Persian navy as well as Persian forces. I've always wondered about those Persian forces because, you know, I'm calling them Persians, and you know just as well as I do that it was what today we would call an international force. And I'm wondering who did all the translating. I imagine that if you were the upper class, you probably understood you got to know some Persian to get anywhere. You can't just go around speaking Babylonian or whatever it is. But whatever it was, I don't think, or one point that Herodotus, of course, is going to emphasize is that Greeks are fighting for Greek lands, while the Persian forces never had that sense of purpose and loyalty and devotion. Maybe not. Marathon has certainly gone down in history as one of the great Greek triumphs. And I wonder if Darius could deal with that pain. You know, as he went home, somebody might have whispered, loser. You know, that hurts. And when you're a world conqueror, you can imagine the pain, psychological. And you wonder again if maybe he said, well, you know, I've got a lot of other projects on my plate, so I'm just going to try to get on with it and not worry. I suspect the latter, but that's just me. Darius will get preoccupied, I think, with Egypt after this particular campaign. And he will end up, shall we say, never going back to Greece. There will be, in short, a long interim period before the Greeks decide to do anything about this situation. And it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what the Greeks thought, whether they had done any planning as to what if they do come back, how will we act, what will we, well, are we going to try to make peace with them, are we just going to accept a full-scale war? But some politicians in Athens are going to be vitally concerned about the possibility of a Persian return. regardless of whether it's Darius or someone else. The leader of this group that wanted to go on a policy of, what shall we call it, preparation, just in case, was the politician, statesman, Themistocles. It will be under Themistocles, one of the great generals, which you know had replaced archons as the major elected executive officials. Themistocles will actually use, remember we talked about ostracism earlier? He will use, or have used, ostracism to, shall we say, put his leading enemy out of commission. I know you're not supposed to use it that way, but it is mighty convenient if someone's leading the opposition to what you want to do in the assembly. You say, how can I shut them up? How can I make sure they are kept very still? And ostracism works beautifully, because once an individual is ostracized, you're sent away for 10 years. And so I think that could really keep some of those who were anti-war development, or shall we say war preparation development, quiet. And that's what Themistocles does. So he is a politician through and through, and a very effective one. In any event, the story of the building up of the great navy of Athens, and we all know the military is not cheap. I don't think anyone needs to be told that. There's no such thing as an economy military. Bargain basement. These triremes, these great ships, became, I hate to say boondoggle, but let's just say it cost a lot of money. And in the Athenian assembly, the regular folks, like people who worked every day, they loved it. And you know why? Jobs, jobs, jobs. Because believe me, these things, you see all those oars, they're not going by themselves. That's a lot of folks. And they all get paid. Some were. But, I mean, it was a mixed populace. And so, amazingly, see, then if they're in the assembly and somebody says, well, you know, we've got a mighty nice Navy now, and maybe we could just sequester, you know, let's keep the costs down. And they say, oh, no, 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 you must be strong, we must be strong, you never know. There could be a terrible invasion, so we got to get the, so that will become a major source. But it's interesting, the idea of the slaves. Yes, they were there. They were there. Don't ever forget the slaves. But you know, many slaves were manumitted too, so that's also a possibility. But there are a lot of folks who just have these regular positions. And I mean, obviously, we would call it the working class, I guess, today. But they're in that assembly, don't forget that. And so when all these spending things come up, and if some fiscal conservative comes along and they go, nay, nay, spend, you know, because we want lots of government projects. So that's Athens. And Themistocles is the man. What they are doing in terms of, shall we say, capital outlay has to do with mines in Attica, silver mines. A group of silver mines seems to have been discovered during this era. And of course, naturally, the populace is always going to be divided in terms of what will we spend this windfall on. I know. Somebody might say, oh, we could put it away and, yeah, right. No, we got to spend it. So one of the ideas is that Themistocles pushes is building up this Athenian navy, and it will come to be a very significant part of the future as we know. So you have the triremes. I thought that was kind of an interesting illustration. And the figure of Themistocles. There are many other figures, but I think Themistocles is one of the most interesting since he was able to, shall we say, manipulate the system for the benefit of military preparation. Because surely, as we know, that there will be breaks, there are also times. Yes, I know. You get one now. But, so, 5 minutes, 4.5, didn't you say? 4.5 only. You'd be back during that half minute. Break has been, time is exhausted. So, it's over. You should have enjoyed it when you had it. Now it's gone. Tell you. So, we are back. We are back. And as we get back, let us note, please, that during this time, as I've said before, on the domestic end, practices and government are evolving towards what will ultimately become a democracy of sorts in the time of Pericles. But sometimes it's hard to put it all together, and so we just have to ask, people to be aware of that fact, the governmental and societal changes as these matters of foreign affairs are going on. But it's like anybody else's history, I guess. It's so hard to remember sometimes how matters are changing domestically in Athens as we are dealing with the potential threat of Persians. And now we come to the son of Darius, and of course, that is Xerxes. This version of Xerxes probably doesn't do him credit. I like to think of him, and I've read, and I hope you have, the book of Esther. And you think, well, maybe he wasn't so bad after all. Because Herodotus Xerxes can be so unattractive in many ways. He just seems to have certain personality defects. Whereas, Esther's husband is, really nice, seems very concerned, wants all the best for Esther, and all this, that, and the other. So you just have to wonder here who had the real Xerxes in mind. I did indicate, according to Herodotus, that he was, I think you'll like this, vainglorious. I don't know the last time you heard anybody call that, but it's not something that we ordinarily go around and say, so-and-so is vainglorious, but I like it. And obstinate, and he had a mind of his own, and I think he had serious ego. And I think probably, at least according to Herodotus, he had to be treated with, as they would say, kid gloves. A lot has to do with the fact that, according to Herodotus, and I do have part of his writing here. When Herodotus provides us in his history with accounts, we wonder, how did he get into the meeting? How did he? They didn't have a secret Greek lover, did they, who was taking notes? And then you think, Herodotus had a very vivid historical imagination, let us say. We'll put it that way to be nice. Just say, this is what I think they probably said. So, according to Herodotus, Xerxes called together various family members, leading military authorities. He said, you know what I want to do? I want to do something even greater than my father did or any of those others. They were great in their time, but I'm greater. And so I want to go, we need to move on to Athens, get on with this thing, and kick some Athenian you know what. And I'll be in all the history books, numero uno. Dad was not bad. Dad was a good king, yeah, very outstanding, but not as great as I am. Now, if you are one of his advisors, and he says, speak freely, please, just go ahead, I can take it. I'm not sensitive. I love other people's opinions. And I want you to share your views, and let's get closer. So one of his generals, and I had to quote this because I just thought it was so good. I think it was his general, his head general, who actually will lead in one of the major generals, named Mardonius. He said, truly, my Lord, you surpass not only all living Persians, but also those not yet born. And I said, oh gosh, no one's ever said that to me. And I'm like, wow, that's something just to wait for. Man, that's the greatest. And I'm thinking, oh, wow. Most true and right is each word that you have uttered. And so how do you go from there? Well, you go basically and say, all of your ideas are so wonderful. Why don't we just keep working on them? And you know, practice makes perfect. A stitch in time saves nine. You can just think of all the little cliches of trying to delay him until we have everything ready. And of course, the ultimate advice, which was actually given by his uncle, for God tolerates pride in none but himself. And that is interesting to think that something of this sort was going on. That Herodotus figured that around Xerxes, there were various Persians who either by family or by military position got a seat at the table and had the right to say something that might not have been just what the ruler wanted to hear. However, it does not mean that Xerxes necessarily took everyone's remarks seriously. I think the term patronizing might go a long way here. And he sort of smiled. He said, good boy, and moved on his way. Because, of course, the idea is that Xerxes is determined to move forward in this campaign. And it will comprise the remainder of the Persian Wars, his campaigns in Greece. The map will show you the extent to which the forces of Xerxes, both naval and land, will go forth. And you will be aware, you see the dots will indicate, you see Lydia up there. So you see all that is part of the Persian Empire. Now, you see Ionia all the way west. All of that is to say, you know, the Persians couldn't go much further until they got actually on the land, except, you know, the various islands. I would also point out to you, south of there, do you see Halicarnassus? And that was Herodotus' original home. So that's where he's from. Of course, that was probably not a beehive of literary and historical activity, so I imagine he went on to Athens as an adult and continued his work. But I must say, Herodotus spent a lot of time in doing what scholars do, and that is travel. He spent a lot of time in Egypt, spent a lot of time in Persia, because he records all of these interesting anecdotes. He's like some professors we might have had who get off the track or allow themselves to be diverted. Evil. But that happens, and we understand that, you know, it's sort of like you're rooting for Herodotus, thinking, he'll get back, I know he will, because that reminds me of somebody I met in Egypt, you know, that kind of thing, and you think, oh, that's interesting. But that's really not germane to why we're reading this, but it's still interesting. Love the anecdotes, love the stories. It is good not only for history, but also for anthropology in terms of lifestyles of the Egyptians, and rich and non-famous, or poor and famous, whatever. In any event, these particular wars, phase 2, are on a much grander scale. Because remember, Xerxes has, to use the Greek word, terminal hubris. He just is going to be the biggest, and he is definitely someone who won't let anything stop him. He will assemble the largest land and naval force possible. He had sent originally, I guess you would say ambassadors, envoys perhaps, to Athens and Sparta, and they were treated somewhat rudely. So I think that's really when he said, now they've had it. I said I wanted respect, and I'm not getting it, and now they're going to learn. But Xerxes himself will have to learn. Now, you see way up north the Hellespont. Up there, he will have special engineers. Yes, so important in war. Engineers construct a pontoon bridge. It's a massive project. He's very excited about it. Because you can imagine the amount of people and materials and all that has to be done. However, circumstances led to the collapse of the pontoon bridge. Yes. And what does Xerxes do? He had anger management issues. Yeah.
What a surprise.
Yes, and he had to spank them. Literally. Can you see? He told his officers to go out there and whip the Hellespont. Bad Hellespont. Now, what about that alumni group, those engineers? Bye-bye. See you in the next world. So, when you don't succeed on an engineering project, don't look for a golden parachute. You won't be needing one where you're going. So, according to Herodotus now, that's a Greek, but according to Herodotus, he was really distressed, Xerxes. And he said, but could this be the same kindly, gentle person who loved dear Esther? I don't know. Maybe he just had a bad day when the pontoon bridge, and that was not really a good time. But all of us, yeah, you see the soldiers, they're beating the water to show it's not good to offend Xerxes. So, and that water was really sorry. You can tell. It's all broken up about it. Truly, stories of this sort are supposed to put us in the, well, the Greek wouldn't have done that. Surely, it's got to be some individual whose conceit is so out of kilter like this man here, Xerxes. In any event, it was still a massive attack. And as such, it continued on northward and then, of course, southward. And again, for those who think of Greeks versus Persians, I invite you to look at the different colors on the map and understand how people, well, you see there the neutrals, and then some are going to go pro-Persian. And again, I wasn't there, so you can't think about what factors may have been involved. Were they coerced into being allies? Did they really want to support Athens and Sparta? I don't know. But I can tell you that if you want to balance it out, it's really difficult to say who had the upper hand in terms of what more Greek people against them than for them. But I can tell you, a lot of the Greeks were actually in the Persian army. They're called mercenaries. So everybody is not this sort of Panhellenic spirit, and say, you go Greek and we're going to, some are saying, go whoever's going to pay my bills. I mean, it's not that they'd fallen in love with Xerxes, I dare say, but I definitely think it has something to do with the fact that there is a difference in point of view, and maybe they were jealous of Athens and Sparta. Whatever it was, opinion ranged among the various states. Meanwhile, as far as Xerxes is concerned, his force obviously was not going to be merely Persian and Mede. As I've just indicated, there were Greeks in there as well as Egyptians and people of all varieties within that Middle Eastern territory, which is phenomenal if you think about all the individuals, linguistic issues and others, to have brought this grand force into Greece. And now he intended to use it. Now, his forces would eventually reach Thermopylae, one of the most famous events of the Persian Wars. And this is a place that was such a focus of that film I mentioned to you, the 300. Because as I may have indicated, when the film came out and my students were just beyond themselves with excitement, and I kept cross-examining them, and I'm saying, where were the Helots? Where were the Helots? And they said, huh? I know, depressing. Because I said, I don't think those Spartans are going to be there unless somebody's there to pick up after them and clean up and so forth and get my lunch ready and all that. In any event, the Battle of Thermopylae is the classic account of Spartan heroism and is told over and over again as an example of the true Spartan character. If so, the King Leonidas, the great Spartan king, led his men, sending away others who were assisting him as they were trying to prevent the Persians from passing after, of course, the Greeks had been betrayed as this Ephialtes. And again, it's all thanks to Herodotus that we know these names and have accounts of these events. But that Persians had bribed him to get them around so that they could then attack the Greeks. The victory of the Persians there was significant in allowing the Persians to continue on, but also, of course, by making the Spartans immortal for their courage to death in this particular campaign. And how many times has that story been told? So, I guess of all the battles in the Persian Wars, I wouldn't say this was the most decisive or even the most significant, but in terms of the character of the people, because we've all heard the same things about the Spartan mother, either come back with your sword or on it, or shield rather. I think we understand the character, and so in this sense, we're merely saying that Thermopylae seemed to carry it out. It doesn't mean, of course, and of course, now we have our tourist attractions. Yes, yes, T-shirts, postcards for everybody. This is so when you're in the Greek world, you can get your statue and you think there's got to be a great Leonidas, what we call it, industry. So if you know, the Spartan themes and so forth, because he symbolizes that. And you notice he's one of the kings. And there are a number of other kings that will participate. And I might add, now that I think about it, as part of the staff of Xerxes, he will have, and we love these people, they're called consultants. I love consultants. I've never had one, but I've always hoped I could be one someday, you know. But what kind of consultants would you want? Well, if I was Xerxes, I'd want tactful ones who told me what I want to hear. And if they disagreed, I would want them to be real nice. You know, like real tactful. Kind of take one of those Dale Carnegie schools. Been real and said, oh, I like your ideas. Can I just add one little detail? You know, one thing like that. But real careful. Careful's the word. Well, who did he have? Well, he had, that is Xerxes, he had a former king of Sparta. Yeah? He hadn't retired. He had been deposed. And, you know, his name was Demaratus, and this fellow, I think he had not been asking a nice way to step down. So he ended up going into the Persian realm because basically he was told we really admire you. We would love for you to join the staff. We'd do some consulting work on the Spartan area. And so off he goes, and in Herodotus, he'll have this wonderful speech about, you are so smart, O great king. You are brilliant. Do you really want me to tell you the truth? He said, oh, go ahead, you crazy Spartan. Go ahead and say, you know, hey, we're just guys. Let's just hang out. Tell me what you think. I'm sure with some trepidation, Demaratus said, there may not be a lot of them, but they are Spartans. Law, not man, is their master. They will not give up simply because you come on. And of course, Xerxes will say, oh, fiddlesticks, oh, poppycock, but thanks anyway, you're a good boy, and sends him away. You say, well, that's not very nice to a former king. Well, I don't think sometimes Xerxes is tactful. But he keeps Demaratus on the force. Secondly, you remember Hippias. Hippias was the son of Pisistratus, who was the predecessor of Solon. Remember? He was the one who was one of Athens' first tyrants. He loved all the people, and Hippias tried to continue his father's ruling ways. But he abdicated, and he said, I wonder where I'd like to go now. And of course, so many of these folks ended up going to Persia because they gave them a nice retirement, a nice living, and doing some consulting work. And he went on until he was in his 80s. And I think he had dreams that his sons, I don't know whether he had married a Persian woman or something like that, but whatever it was, according to our one great source, Herodotus, the idea was that Hippias and his descendants dreamt of taking over Athens, presumably as a satrap. So, yeah. So, the idea being then that there were Greeks that were saying, now this is a great campaign, let's all work together on our Greco-Persian campaign, or Perso-Greco maybe, but whatever, to make sure that this will be a harmonious takeover. So that was the plan, which didn't happen. It would, in fact, as we see from the routes, lead both to land conflicts in the south, land conflicts that were accompanied by naval ones. Now, they didn't get over, you say, God, Sparta missed out on everything. I don't think they minded that too much, but the Spartans were involved insofar as they could be. But you understand they do have security issues at home, so I think the Helots are on a holiday because the Persians are coming. I don't think the Helots could care less whether the Spartans have problems. But whatever the case, the united force would have involved going to meet the Persians at various places, and in particular where you see Salamis down south. There, with both land and naval forces, the Persians will almost seem as if they've won. Some of you may have heard how Athens was actually burned physically, and the Athenians went to an adjoining island while it was going on. Despite that fact, however, in the Battle of Salamis Bay, as it's called, the ultimate victory will, of course, be that of the Greeks. It appears that despite all of the resources that Xerxes had put into this, he could not definitively defeat the Greeks. And so, with so much, and remember, this is the far end of his empire. And one assumes that during or after Salamis Bay, some of his advisors back home finally alerted him to the fact that he had a lot more on his plate. And as a result of that, I won't say he abandoned the campaign, because there were some battles after he left. But let's say that it no longer had the significance that it had had before. I thought this was kind of an interesting illustration when you see the Persians versus the Greeks. And again, both land and naval. And can you imagine, again, destroying the whole city in terms of burning it down? And I think this was done deliberately so the Persians couldn't get it, kind of like the Soviets when the Germans came during the Second War. I think, again, it doesn't mean that victory is total, but it is, for the times, a very massive encounter between Greek and Persian forces, this Salamis Bay. And it certainly convinced Xerxes that he had other matters to attend to. The final battle, Plataea, and you see it over here. And again, these are supposed to be ruins from the battle. And you can see where it is north there of Athens, was a massive land battle. And you're going to be amazed when I remind you of who the Greek commander of all the forces was. We talked about him last week or the week before. It was Pausanias. He was the Persian who ended up, Spartan rather, who ended up collaborating with Persians, and he was starved out of the temple. But at this particular point, he is their great hero, leading land forces to essentially expel Persia. I don't think they did it entirely, but they did it for the most part in this Battle of Plataea. I assume that as far as Navy was concerned, much of the Persian Navy had been lost during Salamis Bay, and we certainly don't hear any more about it. As a matter of fact, you don't hear any more about Persians having active military campaigns for a very long time. I mean, obviously Xerxes continues on as king of Persia, and obviously the Greeks will continue to live right next door to them. However, Persia is no longer a physical threat to the continuation of the Greeks. Not that they will not affect them, however. Persians love to offer either Athenians or Spartans, depending on who's mad at the time. They like to offer them invitations to come on over. So they will try, these Persians will try to intervene in Greek politics. Like, I know you're hurting. Don't you want to come on over here and let's talk about it? Maybe there would be a satrapy for you. And of course, the filth of bribery is then involved. Yes, and that happens. Many a fine Greek will fall victim. And guess who one of them is? The hall of shame keeps growing. I'll name another one. Themistocles. You say, oh no. Yes. He too. They would get angry at him, at some point, and he would say, Lord, I want to go on and move on. As we all do, and we understand that. And I'm sure the Greeks wanted to move on, wanted to build a new world for themselves. But can they, despite their bitterness and rancor? You'll need to come back next week for yet another chapter. Thank you very much.